I saw my son sitting on a stone bench in Dumbarton Oaks Park. Beside him was my grandson, and at their feet, an untidy pile of suitcases, as if someone had just been pushed out of their own life. I asked calmly, "Why are you here, instead of at the office your in-laws put you in charge of?" Miles lowered his head. "I got fired, Mom." Harlan said, "Our blood isn't worthy of the Pembroke brand," that I stained their family's reputation. I let out a soft laugh. "Get in the car." Miles had no idea that for the past several years, I had been the one paying the salary of that arrogant father-in-law. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment telling me which state and city in the United States you're watching this story from. And now, let's continue. Washington, D.C., seen from the 25th floor, always has a deceptively calm look. Rows of gray rooftops stretch endlessly. The Potomac River glints like steel. The traffic below looks like a line of ants, diligently carrying their burdens back to the nest. I stood by the black-tinted glass of my office window, holding a cup of tea gone cold, watching the people move below. To others, it was just traffic. To me, it was the circulatory system of the empire I had built with my entire life. Waverly Logistics. The name probably means nothing to people on the street, but it opens every door, from the ports of New York to Los Angeles. I built this empire over 30 years. It began with a single old truck and a debt large enough to make others think about a noose. I learned how to be hard when necessary, and invisible when it was advantageous, especially invisible. Money likes silence. Big money loves deadly silence. That's why you'll never see my face in society pages. I always chose to stand in the shadows, pulling strings, while others showed off under the spotlight. That was my strategy, and it worked perfectly until recently. Maybe I should tell you about the night that shaped the person I am today. I was 28 years old. Rain was pouring down on Interstate 95. I was driving an old Freightliner, the first truck I ever bought with loan shark money, hauling cargo from Baltimore back to D.C. One windshield wiper was broken. I had to lean out the window to see the road. Rain lashed my face, ice cold. My hands were numb on the steering wheel. That night, I was carrying a container of medical equipment worth $200,000. Everything I owned put up as collateral to borrow money and start my company. If I lost that container, I lost everything. My husband and I would be sleeping in the truck cabin. The small apartment in Anacostia would be gone too. Then I saw the brake lights of a sedan ahead, less than 2 meters away. I slammed the brakes. The 12-ton truck slid across the flooded road. My heart nearly stopped. In my head, there was only one sentence. No, no, no. The truck stopped. Just inches from the sedan. I sat trembling in the cabin, both hands still gripping the wheel. Then I cried, not out of fear, but out of rage. Rage at myself. A black woman from the South Bronx, no college degree, no connections, gambling everything on a dream everyone called insane. But that night, I swore to myself, if I survive this, I will never let anyone see me weak again. I will build an empire strong enough that my child will never have to be afraid like this. 5 years later, I had 5 trucks. 10 years later, I bought out the partner who once tried to cheat me. 20 years later, my name appeared on the list of the most powerful women in logistics, even though no one knew what I looked like. And 30 years later, today, I stand in this office, looking down at the city I once feared, now lying at my feet. I turn to look at the family photo on my desk. Miles, my son. My only weakness, and the greatest investment of my life. 3 years ago, I made a decision many partners called reckless. I decided to test my son. Not the kind of test where rich kids sit in their parents' offices pretending to work. No. I wanted Miles to experience the real world. I acquired a mid-sized logistics company, Capital Freight, and installed someone else as CEO, not my son. I put Harlan Pembroke in that position. Miles's father-in-law, a man whose ego was several times larger than his bank account. Harlan loved to talk about noble bloodlines, about family legacy, about how business was an art reserved for the chosen few. He didn't know one thing. Capital Freight belonged to me. Through a chain of shell companies and proxies, the ultimate beneficiary of everything he took pride in was me. The black woman he referred to behind my back as a lucky street vendor. I sent Miles to work under him as chief commercial officer. No protection, no intervention. "Mom, I can handle it myself," Miles told me then. "I want Sloan and my father-in-law to respect me for my ability, not because of your checkbook." I agreed. I wanted him to learn how to take hits, to learn to see people's true faces when they think they hold power. And he did. My God, he saw so much. I clearly remember the first dinner at the Pembroke Mansion in Georgetown. Every Sunday I drove there. The house with its white columns and perfectly manicured lawn, the embodiment of the Pembroke family's ambition. The irony was that the mortgage on that house was indirectly paid through dividends from my own company. But I stayed silent. Harlan sat at the head of the table like a king. Sloan, my daughter-in-law, sat to his right. Tight white dress, blonde hair tied low, flawless fair skin. She looked at me the way one looks at furniture that doesn't match the decor. "Mrs. Waverly," Harlan said in a falsely warm voice, "I hope you enjoy Wagyu beef." "We had it flown in from Japan. Old family friends." "I eat anything," I replied. Miles sat next to me, tense. He held his knife carefully, but not carefully enough. "Miles," Harlan frowned, "you don't hold a glass like that. This is a vintage Cabernet, not cheap beer from a corner bar." "At our level," he continued, "small details like that reveal a person's origins, or the lack of them." Miles put the glass down. He said nothing. Sloan smiled coldly, stroking the diamond bracelet on her slender wrist. "Daddy only wants what's best for you," she said sweetly. "You should be grateful to be accepted into our family." I sipped my tea and memorized every word. I saw my son's hand clench under the table. I saw the light in his eyes slowly fade, but I waited. In the months that followed, my instincts began to roar. Reports from Capital Freight arrived late, not by a day or two, but by entire weeks. Harlan talked about software upgrades and workforce optimization. I knew what that meant. Then Sloan stopped answering my calls. And then, Miles. He came to see me a week ago, only 30 minutes. He looked like a ghost. I didn't look at his face. I looked at his wrist. The Patek Philippe, his 30th birthday gift, was gone. "Where's your watch?" I asked. "At the repair shop," he said. A pause. A lie. He had sold it because he needed money. And didn't dare ask me. I called Desmond, ordered a full audit of Capital Freight, and today I decided not to wait any longer. We drove toward Dumbarton Oaks Park. And then I saw them. Miles, Noah, suitcases. "Why are you here?" I asked. "I don't have an office anymore, and I don't have a home either." Harlan fired him. Sloan kicked him out. "Blood incompatibility." I picked up my grandson. "Blood incompatibility, right?" I smiled. "Get in the car, Miles." In the car, I didn't comfort him. Everything will be okay. Doesn't happen naturally. It's the result of planning and ruthless execution. I ordered the audit, reviewed the Georgetown properties, and then, in Chevy Chase, Desmond handed me a gray folder, a theft report, $250,000, filed by Harlan Pembroke. They didn't just throw my son out. They wanted to send him to prison. I looked at Harlan's signature. "Desmond," I said softly, "I need a war." "Where do we start?" I smiled. "Start small. Tomorrow morning, Harlan's office keys will no longer open any doors." I tapped the folder against my palm. "They want to accuse my son of theft? Fine. I'll show them what real theft looks like. I stepped into my house. For the first time in many years, I felt alive. The machine had started. In the next part, you'll see how an invisible woman turns an entire self-proclaimed noble family into prey, using nothing but paperwork, time, and deadly silence. Don't go anywhere. The second-floor office in my house turned into a real command center. The large oak desk was buried under documents, contract copies, bank reports, scanned signatures. On the wall was a whiteboard where I began drawing the Pembroke family tree like a battlefield map. Harlan at the center, Sloan as the underground artery, and Miles, the target aimed straight at the heart. Miles sat across from me. He was pale but forcing himself to stay composed. Beside him were my two best attorneys, Cameron and Victor. They didn't ask pointless questions. They only separated facts from emotion, peeling layer after layer like an onion. Miles, Cameron tapped the tip of her pen against the desk. Do you remember? Did you sign this container receipt from China, August 12th? Miles frowned, rubbing his temple. No. In August, I was on a business trip in Baltimore. I couldn't have signed it physically. Victor slid a scan in front of him, his voice calm. But the signature is yours. The forgery is very sophisticated. I watched everything from my chair. I didn't need to stick my hands into every detail. My people knew what they had to do. My job was to keep the big picture, like standing on a hilltop to see the enemy's entire formation instead of staring at one gun. I opened my laptop and logged into the banking interface of the holding company. Green lines glowed on the screen. Credit limits for the subsidiaries ran down the list. Capital Freight was among them. Overdraft limit, $1 million. This was what kept a business alive through cash flow gaps, payroll, rent, customs taxes. Without it, Harlan's machine would suffocate within a week. I moved the cursor to the button. Suspend service. My finger paused for exactly 1 second. Not out of hesitation, but because I always anticipated an opponent's reaction, like a surgeon clamping an artery to stop the bleeding. Only this time, I was cutting oxygen to a tumor. I clicked, click. The status changed to blocked by bank security service. Reason, internal partner review, a vague bureaucratic explanation, perfect for driving someone insane. I leaned back, then shifted my gaze to the second screen. It was a live feed from the surveillance cameras inside Capital Freight's office. Those cameras had been installed 5 years ago under the label of security. Harlan thought they only recorded to storage. He had no idea. There was a live channel running straight to me. On the screen, Harlan Pembroke paced like a caged animal. He flung his arms screaming into the face of the head accountant, a poor woman shaking uncontrollably. There was no audio, but from the veins bulging in his neck and his flushed red face, I knew exactly what happened. He had just tried to make a payment, and the bank refused. Harlan grabbed the phone. I knew who he would call. Peter Henderson, the branch manager. Harlan considered him a friend. They played golf together on Thursdays. I picked up my phone and sent Peter a short text. Harlan will call. Say it's a system issue. New York is checking the algorithm. Timeline uncertain. No exceptions. On the screen, I watched Harlan freeze with the receiver pressed to his ear. Then his face collapsed. He argued, slammed his fist on the desk. He slammed the phone back into its cradle. I read his lips. System issue. He believed it. Of course he believed it. In his worldview, he was the center. The bank was just a service. He couldn't even imagine that the bank was me. Harlan dropped into his chair, loosened his tie, poured himself water as if soothing himself. Nonsense, they'll fix it tomorrow. He didn't understand this wasn't an issue. This was a clamp, and I would tighten it, slowly. Some wars don't begin with gunfire. They begin with small details. A signature placed in the wrong spot, a loan that appears out of nowhere, a phone call someone thinks is blackmail but is actually a confession. And the scariest part wasn't what they were doing to Miles. It was how long they had been doing it, right under my nose, and I was only just starting to see it. If you think this is just a story about being fired and getting divorced, then you haven't seen how the shell is really starting to crack. I remembered the third Sunday dinner at the Pembroke Mansion. The atmosphere had already changed. For the first time, I could feel the contempt was no longer being hidden. Sloane sat at the head of the table across from Harlan, a seat usually reserved for the lady of the house. I recognized it instantly. She was claiming ownership. Miles sat off to the side, as far as possible, from the center of power. "Mrs. Waverly," Sloane began, her voice sweet but cold as a razor, "I heard that last week you gave Miles a Patek Philippe watch. Truly generous." She paused, lifting her wineglass toward the light. "But perhaps you should consult your daughter-in-law first. If he wears a watch like that to meetings with our clients, some people might think he's showing off. We wouldn't want to create the wrong impression, would we?" I set my knife down slowly. "That was my son's birthday gift, Sloane. And I don't think my son needs anyone's permission to wear his mother's gift." "Oh, of course not," Harlan cut in, his voice gentle with a blade hidden inside. "It's just that, at our level, subtlety is everything. People judge you not by what you have, but by how you carry it. Miles is still learning that." I looked at Miles. He bit his lower lip, eyes fixed on his plate. He didn't respond. He had learned to stay silent to survive. But inside me, something began to smolder. Not hot, cold. Cold as ice. Dinner continued with tension stretched tight like a wire. When dessert arrived, an expensive panna cotta Sloane bragged she had ordered from a bakery in Paris, she turned to Miles as if announcing a decision already approved. "Baby Daddy and I talked. We think you should adjust the way you dress a little. You still wear suits from department stores. We need a consistent image for the brand." "What do you want me to wear?" Miles asked. His voice was even, but I heard the exhaustion underneath. "We'll have them made for you," Harlan answered for her, "by my tailor on Savile Row. Of course, the cost will be deducted from your year-end bonus. Consider it an investment in your career." Deducted from his bonus to buy clothes they were forcing him to wear. I finished my tea, said nothing, but I remembered. I remembered everything. As we were about to leave, Sloane handed me a small gift bag. "Here, Mom, some homemade scones. Hope you like them." I took the bag and thanked her politely. When I got home, I opened it. Not homemade scones. Scones bought from Whole Foods. The price label was still on, $4.99. The gift they gave me, $4.99. I didn't throw it away. I put that bag in the refrigerator to remind myself this is how they see me, and this is how they see my son. "Mom!" Miles's voice pulled me out of the memory. "We found something else. Look at this." Miles handed me a printout, a personal loan contract in his name, $50,000 secured by his car. I didn't sign this. I scanned the text quickly. "Who's the lender?" "A company called Fast Cash LLC. I exchanged a look with Desmond, standing at the doorway. He nodded and left. In 10 minutes, I would have a file on Fast Cash. Most likely, it was one of Harlan's shell companies. The original plan, classic fake aristocracy, load debt onto the son-in-law, squeeze his assets, then funnel the cash into their own pockets. "Don't worry," I told Miles. "That paper isn't worth the ink it's printed with. We'll run handwriting analysis. But first," Miles's phone vibrated on the desk. Sloane's photo lit up on the screen. The silence in the room stretched taut. Miles reached out, but I stopped him. "Put it on speaker and stay quiet. I'll talk." The moment the words left my mouth, I caught myself. No. If I answered, she would suspect. She needed to believe Miles was breaking. And alone. "Answer," I ordered. "But don't promise anything. Just listen and record the call." Miles inhaled deeply. He accepted. A recording icon appeared. "Hello." "Oh, are you sick of it yet, hero?" Sloane's voice dripped with venom and victory. How's sleeping at the train station? Or did you run back to Mommy's skirt? Miles clenched his jaw and looked at me. I signaled, stay calm. What do you want, Sloane? I want to settle things succinctly. Daddy is willing to withdraw the police report. We're not animals, Marcus. She said it smoothly and used the wrong name like a slap. But I understood the point. She wanted to treat Miles like a pawn not worth remembering. We understand, she continued. You stumbled, you stole. That happens to anyone when they don't have money. I didn't steal anything, Miles growled. Shh. Don't yell, she cut him off. Listen carefully. Tomorrow, you go to a notary and sign a paper. Simple, purely procedural. Admit you took money from the company fund as a loan and promise to pay it back. Just a small amount, she paused. $100,000. $100,000? Miles's eyes went wide. That's the price of your freedom, sweetheart. Sign it and the report disappears. Her voice slowed, as if savoring dessert. And I'll allow you to see Noah on weekends, under my supervision. I felt something inside me turn colder, darker. Extortion, using a child as bait. That was the lowest thing an adult could do. And if I don't sign, Miles asked, his voice hollow, then you go to jail, Sloane answered as casually as talking about the weather. And your son will be raised by a new daddy, a normal man, someone in our class. Daddy already found a suitable candidate for me. She gave a soft laugh. Think about it, Miles. Your deadline is tomorrow morning. Click. Miles dropped the phone onto the desk. Both hands covered his face. She's a monster. I stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting, staining the sky a deep crimson, a beautiful sunset, the color of blood. No, Miles, I said softly. She isn't a monster. I turned back to my son, my voice calm to the point of cold. She's just an idiot, a greedy idiot, and complacent. I looked at Cameron and Victor. You heard that, right? We heard it, Mrs. Nadine, Cameron replied. Attempted extortion, coercion, threats. The recording is very good. Perfect, I said. Attach it to the file. I glanced up at the camera feed. Harlan was still sitting in his office, staring at the wall, as if believing he had won. He thought he had backed us into a corner. He didn't know that Sloane had just placed in my hand the detonator that would blow their lives into pieces. Desmond, I called when he came back into the room. I have a new assignment. He stopped instantly, waiting for orders. We need to set up a meeting with a notary, but not their pocket lawyer. I want someone real. Desmond nodded. And prepare the paperwork to buy up Harlan's debts from the bank, I continued, each word dropping like nails. All of them, including the loan for his car. Desmond narrowed his eyes slightly. You want to become his only creditor? I smiled. I want to become his only nightmare. I stepped over to Miles and placed a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow, you're not going anywhere. Tomorrow, we counterattack, but not where they expect. I felt his shoulder tremble faintly, but he stayed still. He was learning how to breathe again. I leaned in and spoke low enough that only he could hear. They want a confession. They'll get one. I curled my lip, the smile of a predator catching the scent of blood. But it will be a confession about their own worthlessness. The next morning, I didn't go to the notary's office the way Sloane expected. I sat in the chairman's office at Northern Capital Bank, Marcus Kleinfeld, the friend who had been with me for 30 years, back from the days when I still had to count every dollar of gas money for that old Freightliner. In front of Marcus was a thick stack of assignment contracts. He flipped through each page, brows knitted like a doctor reading lab results for a difficult case. Eleanor, are you sure? Marcus asked, his voice low. You're buying the debts of Harlan C. Pembroke personally and the entity Capital Freight LLC at a discount, but the total is still significant. This is a high-risk asset. I didn't look up right away. I simply set my fountain pen down in its exact place, then signed the final page, my handwriting decisive as a scalpel line. This isn't an asset, Marcus, I said. It's a tool. and I know how to use it. At exactly 12 noon, the process was complete. Now I owned not only the land under their house, I owned the mortgage on that house, the car loans, the overdraft line, and even the credit cards Sloan loved to swipe in those Milan boutiques. I had become their only creditor, the judge, and the executioner. I stood, shook Marcus's hand. "Thank you, and I have one more request," I said, still calm. "Freeze their accounts, all of them. Right now. Reason, suspicious activity, and change of creditor." Marcus looked at me for another second, as if he wanted to ask, "What are you planning to do next?" But he didn't ask. He only nodded. "Done immediately." But before I crushed them completely, I needed one last thing. A voluntary confession, and Sloan, with her bottomless greed, would hand it to me with her own hands. I called her. "Hello, Sloan. This is Nadine Waverly." I softened my voice by a single beat, exactly like a desperate mother trying to keep her pride intact. "Yes, I know about the police report. I know about Miles's debts. No, don't hang up. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to negotiate." I paused for exactly one beat, letting her imagine the ending she wanted to hear. "I want to buy my son's freedom." The line went silent. Then I heard her breathing, the greedy, eager breath of a predator catching the scent of prey it thinks has fallen. "And what are you offering?" Sloan asked cautiously. "My penthouse apartment on DuPont Circle," I said, "and the summer house as well, in exchange for withdrawing the report and giving up alimony." "The apartment?" Joy cut through her voice. "That penthouse?" "Yes," I replied. "But I need your commitment in writing." "Of course," she nearly squealed. "When?" "Today, 3 p.m. at the cafe inside the United States Botanic Garden Conservatory. Just you. Alone." I ended the call. She bit. Of course she bit. Greed had always been Sloane's greatest weakness. She thought she was winning. She thought I was surrendering. She didn't know that I was going to that meeting not with the apartment paperwork. I was going there with a disguised microphone and a tactical team waiting for my signal in the room next door. There is one brutal truth I learned in business. The greedy don't fear crime. They only fear losing their share. So if you want a confession, you don't force it with morality. You use bait. And the best bait in the world is always the thing the greedy believe they deserve. At 3 p.m., Sloan would walk into that glass garden with the face of a suffering wife, but she would walk out of there with exactly what she truly was inside. The United States Botanic Garden Conservatory wasn't chosen by accident. A quiet corner in the middle of the city, drowned in the green of palms and banyans, creating the illusion of peace and safety, the ideal place for a heart-to-heart, and for a trap. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table deep inside the hall, near a window overlooking the courtyard. I wore a simple beige-white blouse. On my chest was a vintage brooch, my husband's gift for our 25th wedding anniversary. Today, that brooch had another purpose. Inside its frame was a professional-grade microphone, sensitive enough to capture even a whisper. I ordered tea and waited. My phone lay face down on the table. Desmond and his team were in the car outside the parking lot, listening to every word. 2 other plainclothes staff sat at the next table, pretending to be a couple in love. Sloan arrived at exactly 3. She looked completely different. The arrogant woman from parties, the champagne yellow dress and the smile sharp as glass, was gone. Today, in front of me was a modest woman, a gray sweater, bare face, eyes reddened as if she'd been crying for a long time. Brilliant acting. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have pitied her. "Mrs. Waverly," she rushed over, nearly knocking over her chair. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I've been so worried, so scared, for Miles." She dropped into the seat across from me and grabbed my hand. Her palm was cold and damp. "Calm down, Sloan," I said gently. I made my voice tremble just enough. the exact sound of a panicked mother. "Tell me what's going on." "Marcus says he's innocent, but—" "Oh, Mrs. Waverly." Sloane began to cry, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Marcus, he's not himself anymore. I don't know what happened. Maybe gambling or bad friends." She inhaled as if it hurt. "He took everything from the house. The heirloom silver. Daddy's coins. Daddy went crazy. He wants to put him in jail. Says thieves belong in prison." I listened and nodded. I stared straight into her sincere eyes, and I saw clearly the way she measured my reaction. Does this old woman believe it? Is she scared? "But that's prison, Sloane." I pressed my hand to my chest near the brooch. "He has a son, your own son. Are you really going to let your child's father sit behind bars?" Sloane lowered her voice, as if stepping into a secret place. "I tried, Mrs. Waverly. I begged Daddy. I said, 'Daddy, think of your grandson.' But he's firm. The damage is too big, $250,000, plus emotional damages. He said only full repayment will stop him." She paused, intentionally letting the silence scare me. "I don't have that much cash, Sloane," I whispered. "All my capital is tied up in the business. The accounts are controlled. You know that." "I know." She squeezed my hand. "But I thought of a way." "Daddy respects real estate. If we offer something equivalent, like your penthouse on DuPont Circle, he'll agree to withdraw the report. I'll persuade him, for the baby's sake." There it was, a 5-bedroom penthouse in an elite building, worth nearly $3 million. In Sloane's eyes, it was no longer compensation. It was winning the lottery. I looked at her. Through the fake tears, I saw a cold flame of greed burning. She was already arranging the furniture in it, inside her head. "But it's my only home," I said slowly. "Where would I go?" "Oh, come on." She waved a hand, her voice urgent. "You can live at the Chevy Chase house. The air is nice, good for your health. And we'll handle the apartment like temporary collateral until Marcus pays off the debt, I swear." "I swear." From someone who had forged signatures and filmed her husband collapsing. I sighed, letting my shoulders sag as if I'd been pushed into a corner. "All right, Sloane. If that's the only way to save my son, I agree." I lifted my head and looked at her, deliberately emphasizing each word like a mother so frightened she had to cling to hope. "But I need to be sure. If I hand over the papers, you'll withdraw the report today and forgive all these fabricated debts, won't you?" I pressed on the word fabricated like a hook. "Of course," she chirped, her eyes flashing with hunger. "I swear on my child's health. The moment we sign the gift agreement, the mortgage agreement, Daddy will call the detective immediately. The case will be closed because we settled." "And what about a receipt?" I asked. "You'll give me confirmation that there are no further claims?" Yes, anything you want," she said quickly. Then she rummaged through her handbag. "I even brought a template. Daddy prepared it, just in case." She set a sheet of paper on the table. I scanned it quickly. This wasn't a settlement. This was a deed of gift, clear, unconditional, transferring the apartment to them with no obligations attached. "Sloane, but it says gift agreement here," I said, playing dumb, acting confused. "That's to simplify the process," she babbled. "Less tax. You understand bureaucracy." "We're family. We're not tricking you." I stared at her for a long moment, like an old woman trying to believe. Then I nodded. "All right," I said softly. "I'll sign tomorrow." "I need to gather documents." "Tomorrow?" Disappointment flickered through her voice. "Can't it be today? Daddy is furious. I'm afraid that by morning he'll change his mind and let the case continue." "The documents are in a bank safe deposit box," I said. "The bank is closed already." "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the notary." "Fine," she said reluctantly, stuffing the paper back into her bag. 10 a.m., but don't be late. Every minute matters." She stood, leaned down, and kissed my cheek. A dry, quick kiss, like a snake bite. "See you tomorrow, Mrs. Waverly." Everything will be okay. I stayed seated at the table. The server brought the bill, I paid, and left a generous tip, because I always pay the right price for the silence of a witness. "Desmond, did you hear that?" I asked softly, fingers touching the brooch. "Every word," his voice came through my earpiece. "First-degree extortion, fraud, coercion, we have enough." "Excellent," I said. "Follow her." I walked out of the cafe and got into Desmond's car. He handed me a tablet. "Look, we intercepted her messages." On the screen was a screenshot of a message thread. "Sloan, the stupid old woman bought it. The apartment is ours. Signing tomorrow. Harlan. And Marcus, let him sit a bit. Contact Daddy. Hand him to the police right after the deal. Let him know his place. Sloan, Daddy's a genius. Get the champagne ready. I read every line. Icy calm spread through my body like a sheet of ice sealing over a lake. They weren't even planning to keep their word. They wanted the apartment and still wanted to send Miles to jail. They wanted to destroy us completely. "The stupid old woman," I repeated out loud, my voice not shaking, not breaking, just empty. Desmond looked at me in the rearview mirror. He didn't ask. He only waited for the next order. I shoved the tablet down onto the seat and looked out the window. "Then," I said slowly, each word stamped like a sentence, "let's see who the stupid one really is." That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous. That feeling had long been replaced by something else. Cold focus. I wasn't lying awake from fear. I was lying awake because I was anticipating. By 7 a.m., I was already in my office. In front of me sat a strong cup of coffee, steaming, but I hadn't touched it. I didn't need caffeine to be awake. I only needed the truth. The door opened without a knock. Desmond walked in. From his face alone, I already knew. Everything was far worse than what we had assumed. His expression was usually as readable as concrete, but right now, at the corner of his mouth, there was something like disgust being held back. He placed a thick folder on my desk. Black, not the usual gray. Black was our unwritten code, a serious threat. "Read it, Mrs. Nadine," Desmond said. His voice stayed even, but dropped one register lower than normal. "Just stay calm." I opened the folder. The first page was a report on Miles's credit history. I skimmed the numbers, and it felt like the blood was drained from my face. Not from fear, from revulsion. Under my son's name were 12 loans from different institutions, from major banks to payday lenders. Total, $1.5 million. Taken out over the past 6 months. "The signature is Miles Waverly's," Desmond said. "Forensics confirmed. High-grade forgery using a plotter, but that's not the worst part. See page 5. I turned the page. Scan trust and authorization agreements appeared. With these loans, the guarantor was Capital Freight, and the collateral was the personal assets of the executive director, meaning, on paper, Miles borrowed the money while Harlan, playing the role of a kind father-in-law, guaranteed his son-in-law with company assets. A simple plan, but ruthless and hypocritical to the core. They took the money, moved it offshore through shell companies, the list was on the next page, then hung the entire debt around Miles's neck. When repayment came due, they would declare Capital Freight bankrupt because of my son's poor management and throw my son in prison for fraud. I read each line as if reading a sentence handed down to my own child. They weren't just stealing, they were building a gallows for Miles, brick by brick, month by month. While we were still eating Sunday dinners with them, while Sloan was still smiling at her husband, they had quietly built the stage for the day my son would be destroyed. That's not all. Desmond's voice got smaller, as if he hated saying it. We hacked Sloan's cloud storage. There's a folder called Evidence. He put a tablet in front of me and hit play. On the screen was video from a hidden camera in their bedroom. Miles sat on the edge of the bed, tired, sad. Sloan paced around him, her voice sounding concerned. but every sentence hit the exact weak point, the way someone uses fingernails to scratch at an open wound. "Marcus, you've been so tense lately. Maybe you should take medication. You're becoming aggressive. You're scaring the baby." Miles replied, his voice hoarse, confused. "What are you talking about? I'm not aggressive, Tiff. I'm just tired." Sloane didn't back off. She stepped forward, pushing him into a corner. "See? You're yelling. You're not stable." Cut. Next file. Another provocation. And another. She pushed Miles to the breaking point, into shouting, into tears, into moments of losing control, then recorded it like a hunter recording prey. She didn't comfort her husband. She trained him, like training a dog, so later she could bring those clips into court and lift her chin and say, "Look, he's unstable, he's dangerous, he can't raise a child." I hit pause. My hand didn't shake. On the contrary, my hand turned hard as stone. If before there had still been some moral limit left inside me, after all, they were still family to my grandson, then in this moment that limit vanished. In front of me were no longer human beings. In front of me were parasites, ruthless, emotionless, feeding on my son's life. "Anything else?" I asked. My voice was flat as glass. "Yes," Desmond answered. "The most important part is at the end of the folder." I flipped to the final pages, and I froze. A mortgage contract. Borrower. Capital Freight LLC lender, an investment fund registered in the Cayman Islands. Amount $5 million. Collateral, General International Freight Transport License number 78A1. The air in the office instantly thickened. License 78A1 did not belong to Capital Freight. It was the license of the parent company, Waverly Logistics. My license, the heart of the empire. Without it, hundreds of trucks would stand still. Warehouses would close. Federal contracts would collapse. Everything I built over 30 years would turn into scrap metal. Harlan had no right to touch that document. He had no right to access the original. How? I exhaled, my voice moving for the first time that morning. "They made a copy," Desmond replied, "through a corrupt notary. They certified the copy as the original, then pledged it to borrow. The funds will hit their account today at noon." He looked straight at me. "If they receive that disbursement, they disappear, and the creditor will come to us, demanding the license." I closed the folder, very slowly. $5 million. The price they were selling wasn't just Miles. They were selling me, too. In their minds, I was a stupid old woman. A black woman who got lucky, not sharp enough to notice until it was too late. They decided to go all in. I stood and walked to the window. Down in the yard, Miles was playing with his son. He tossed the boy up high. The boy burst into laughter, pure and bright, as if betrayal had never existed. My son, my grandson. And those creatures wanted to take everything from them. Freedom, future, dignity. I felt a surge rise in my chest, but it wasn't chaos. It was power. The power of a tsunami formed out at sea, now sliding toward shore with unstoppable speed. "Desmond," I said without turning, "stop the disbursement by any means. Call the Federal Reserve, the FBI, connect our people in financial surveillance. That money cannot reach them." "Understood," Desmond said. "And what about them?" I turned back. In the mirror across the room, I saw myself. There was no mercy in my eyes. "For them," I said, "we won't just block it. We'll give them a chance to bury themselves deeper. There's a type of thief you can't catch right away with handcuffs. You have to let them feel confident. You have to let them show off their victory. You have to let them speak the sentences that later become the noose. And I knew exactly what I would do to make Harlan and Sloane talk too much. That afternoon, I didn't go to the notary. I wore a serious gray suit, high quality but deliberately modest, no brand labels, no flashy jewelry. I looked exactly the way they imagined, a wealthy old woman in retirement, lucky once, now spending her last days watering geraniums. Marcus and I went to a cocktail event before an auction, held at a modern art gallery. This was Harlan's territory, the place filled with the very people he considered his class, gallery owners, antique dealers, heirs to old names, and a desperate crowd of nouveau riche trying to buy history with money. Harlan and Sloane were there too. They were glowing. Sloane wore a champagne yellow dress. I was certain it had been bought on Capital Freight's company card under entertainment expenses, holding her glass like a scepter of power. Harlan was flushed from cognac, the center of a group laughing and talking. I held a glass of sparkling water and stood in the shadow of a column, not too far from them. No one noticed me. I was background, decoration, something they didn't have to remember. "What a drama," Sloane said loudly, theatrical to the point of broadcasting. She rolled her eyes. Marcus just vanished, couldn't handle the pressure. You all know business at this level requires nerves of steel, and honestly, he's too simple for it. Street background. "You know what I mean." A woman nodded, putting on a look of sympathy. "Poor Tiff," that woman said, "alone with a child and the whole business on her shoulders." "Oh, come on." Harlan stepped in, adjusting his bow tie. "We'll manage. The Pembroke family has survived worse times. We're cleansing ourselves. Sometimes you have to cut off a rotten branch so the tree can grow." Then he raised his voice, as if delivering a speech to the room. "By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I have wonderful news. Our company is reaching new heights. We're about to attract a major investor from Europe." I nearly choked on my water. A major investor from Europe, while their accounts were frozen and their balance was nearly zero. This wasn't a lie anymore. This was a delusion, but the people around him still nodded, still made the right appreciative sounds on cue. They believed in the pretty picture because everyone wanted to believe. Harlan finally noticed me. For 1 second, irritation flashed in his eyes as if he just spotted a stain on a tablecloth. But immediately he put on his noble mask of indulgence and walked toward me. "Mrs. Waverly," he said loudly, deliberately drawing attention from the people around him. "What a surprise! You decided to come out into society." He stepped closer, wrapping me in expensive cologne and alcohol-heavy breath. "I came to hear about your success, Harlan," I said softly, eyes fixed on the bridge of his nose, "and to ask after my grandson." Harlan smiled patronizingly, even patted my shoulder. I nearly had to fight the instinct to brush his hand off. "The boy is wonderful," he said. "He has a new nanny, Oxford accent. And as for success, I've wanted to tell you for a long time." He lowered his voice, but still loud enough for those nearby to hear, on purpose. "Marcus. He's a good kid, truly handy, but he's not an eagle. He doesn't have the upbringing, the understanding of finer things. We tried to pull him up, educate him, but genetics are stubborn." He shrugged as if apologizing on behalf of fate. "Don't be offended, but he just isn't worthy of us." Worthy. That word echoed in my head like a hollow sound. "I understand," I replied, calm. "Yes, worthy." He grew even more enthusiastic, drunk on confidence. "Big business is a game for the chosen. It takes vision, courage, connections. Marcus counts every penny he saves from paperclips. Stinginess is a sign of spiritual poverty." He leaned toward me, as if granting mercy. "But don't worry, we'll take care of him. If he signs the paperwork, we won't let him starve. Maybe I'll arrange for him to drive in our fleet. He likes vehicles." I nodded, taking a sip of water to hide the smile trying to break free. "A driver in the fleet I bought." "You're very generous, Harlan," I said. "We try." He puffed out his chest. "Excuse me, work is calling." "Investors don't like to wait." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the hall. I watched, but he didn't go toward the bankers, not toward famous patrons. He walked toward a far corner near the service exit, where a short, bald man with sharp, crafty eyes was waiting. I recognized him instantly, Boris the Owl Whitmore. In certain circles, he was called the cleaner, but he didn't mop floors. He laundered dirty assets, bought stolen goods, liquidated cheap bankrupt assets, made inventory disappear. If Harlan was talking to the owl, there was only one meaning. He wasn't looking for an investor. He was looking for a buyer. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera, hiding it under my clutch. I zoomed enough to catch their faces clearly. Harlan spoke animatedly, jabbing a finger at his phone screen. The owl listened, smirked skeptically, then nodded and pulled out a notebook. I saw Harlan hand him a small black USB drive. What was on it? Customer databases, logistics plans, equipment documents. And then I understood immediately. He didn't just throw Miles out. He decided to dump the company's assets before I could intervene. He thought the bank issue was temporary. And he needed cash now to plug holes, to buy more time to play aristocrat. Plainly, he was selling trucks, my trucks, for cash under the table. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was organized grand theft, planned, with a buyer, with a fixer. My phone vibrated. A message from Desmond. Mrs. Nadine, we cracked their mail. They're preparing to sell 10 Mack trucks tomorrow morning. Buyer is an entity tied to organized crime. Price, 30% of market value. Cash? I looked at Harlan. He shook the owl's hand and smiled as if he'd just signed a prestigious contract. He was selling my assets to a gang for 1/3 of their value, just to buy himself more time to pretend. That was a mistake. A fatal mistake. I finished my water and set the glass on a passing server's tray. Harlan walked past me again, radiant. Still here, Mrs. Waverly. He tossed the words over his shoulder. Don't be sad. Try the caviar canapes. People say they're not bad. At least eat like a normal person. Enjoy your meal, Harlan, I replied lightly. Enjoy it while you still can. He didn't slow down. He was confident I was just a jealous old woman. He didn't hear the sentence in my voice. I stepped out of the gallery and took a breath of cold air. Miles was waiting in the car. How was it? He asked, anxious. Better than I thought, I said, getting in and fastening my seatbelt. They didn't just make mistakes, Miles. They exposed themselves completely. What happened? Your father-in-law decided to sell our trucks in pieces tomorrow morning. Miles went pale. But that's the end. If the trucks disappear, they won't go anywhere. I cut him off. I pulled out my phone and called the city sheriff directly, the man I'd known since the 90s, when I once helped equip his patrol units. Hello, Sheriff Miller. Good evening. This is Eleanor Waverly. Yes, it's been a long time. I kept my voice normal, like I was asking for a routine administrative favor, but every word was an order. I have a request. No, not personal, official. I have information about a planned transaction involving stolen transport vehicles, 10 tractor trailers, tomorrow morning. Yes, I'll provide the plates and the address. We need both seller and buyer caught in the act. I paused for a beat. Yes, thank you. I owe you one. I ended the call and turned to Miles. Tomorrow, Harlan Pembroke will receive his investment in the form of handcuffs. Miles swallowed hard. But this is only the beginning, I continued. I want to know where he's been putting stolen money before and why he contacted the owl with such confidence. There's something else here, deeper. The car started rolling. I looked out at the bands of light in Washington, D.C. at night, patches of brightness and shadow woven together like a chessboard. Harlan thought I was a harmless old woman. He didn't know. I was the iceberg that had ripped open his Titanic, and the water was pouring into the hull. The next morning, I woke before dawn, not because I couldn't sleep anymore, but because my body had adapted to the rhythm of war. When a strike is about to fall, you can't lie still like ordinary people. Miles sat in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee, but not drinking. He tried to look calm, yet his eyes kept flicking toward the window as if he feared someone might appear at any moment. I set a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to look outside anymore, Shane," I said. "Today, the ones who have to look outside are them." Miles swallowed hard. "Mom, if they find out you're doing this, then what?" I held his gaze. "You gave them a chance to be human. They chose to be predators. So today, they'll learn the laws of the jungle." Desmond stood a few steps away in dark clothes, a radio earpiece on. He no longer asked for my opinion. He simply updated me like a precise clock. "Mrs. Nadine," he said quietly, "Sheriff Miller's team is ready. They've positioned camera-equipped vehicles, plainclothes officers, and a blockade unit at the end of the road. The transaction is scheduled for 7:30. I nodded. "And the owl?" "He entered the warehouse yard at 6:45 with 2 men armed." Miles went pale. "Armed? Nothing surprising," I said evenly. "Normal people don't buy trucks with cash inside a sealed yard at early morning." Miles looked down at his hands. "I don't understand why they'd go this far." I didn't understand either, at least not in the emotional way. But by experience, I knew one thing. When a man is confident enough to shake hands with the owl in the middle of a cocktail party, it means he's done it, more than once. I looked at Miles the way you look at a man who's just been hauled back from the edge. "They think you're weak," I said, "and they think I'm old. That's why." We got into the car. I didn't go all the way to the exchange site. I didn't need to witness it with my own eyes. I only needed evidence stamped by truth. Desmond turned on the tablet screen, split into 2 frames. One was a live feed from the sheriff's team, the other a position map. On the screen, the warehouse yard appeared in the pale gray light of a cold season morning. 10 tractor units stood in a row, their black bodies glossy, their logos partially covered with tape, as if trying to hide their origin. I saw a man in a thick jacket pointing and gesturing, familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. Harlan Pembroke. He wasn't standing there like a man selling stolen assets. He stood there like a man hosting a product launch, smiling, arms sweeping, as if these trucks were his family legacy. A dark van parked not far away. The door slid open. Boris Owl Whitmore stepped out. Short, hunched shoulders, collar up. The 2 men with him scanned the area like hunting dogs. I didn't need sound to guess they were checking escape routes. Desmond murmured, as if reading the weather. "Cash handoff in 3 minutes. On screen, a suitcase was placed on the hood of a truck. Harlan bent over it and opened it. Stacks of money, thick, neat, enough to make a person forget they ever had a soul." Harlan smiled. In that moment, I saw him living in his truest form, a man certain no one would dare touch him. Then everything happened very fast. A police vehicle surged in through the right side gate. Another blocked the narrow road ahead. Plainclothes officers flashed badges, raised hands, shouted commands. A sharp "Freeze!" blasted through a loudspeaker. The owl reacted faster. He stepped back. One of the 2 men with him reached toward his jacket, but the police had been waiting for exactly this moment. They flooded in like a breached dam, running footsteps, metal clanging, shouts, orders. Screams. Within seconds, everything became a picture of chaos, with structure. Harlan stood frozen. I saw his face go blank, then his head whip around as he looked for a way out. But the exits were sealed. An officer stepped in, wrenched his arms behind his back. The cuffs snapped tight. Harlan Pembroke was cuffed like the thief he truly was. Miles jolted up from his seat like he'd been shocked. "Oh my God!" I didn't blink. "Don't pity him," I said. "He built a prison for you. Today is just a change of seats." But just as I thought I'd reached the core of it all, Desmond looked at me. His eyes darkened. "Mrs. Nadine," he said, "it's not over." I turned. He switched the screen to another feed, intercepted internal messages. A short exchange. Cold, emotionless. "Sloan, what if they catch Daddy? Recipient, Plan B is ready. Sloan, License 78A1. Recipient, transfer rights the moment funds are dispersed. Sloan, Miles will be the sacrifice. I felt the air inside the car change, not from fear, from a puzzle piece snapping into a far more horrifying picture. I looked at Desmond. What is Plan B? Desmond didn't answer right away. He tapped open a file. On the screen was an email confirming a notary appointment. Not at the office Sloan had mentioned, somewhere else, more discreet. The name of the person scheduling it. A notary. And one more name that made my throat feel pricked with needles. Marcus Kleinfeld. I leaned forward. No, I said softly. Impossible. Desmond looked at me, and for the first time his voice cracked. Mrs. Nadine, we've only suspected, but there are signs that they're not just using a corrupt notary. They're trying to link into a higher-level legitimizing source. Someone who can make a copy become something treated as valid in the system. My hands tightened. If that was true, then their plan didn't stop at selling trucks or throwing Miles in jail. They were trying to turn my license into the final card and use the system itself to stamp it. Miles looked at me, his voice rough. Mom, you mean they still have a way out? I turned to him. No, I said. They think they still have a way out. I grabbed my phone and called immediately. Desmond, I said. This time my voice wasn't flat anymore. It was sharp as a blade. Move the priority level to red. I want to know who is behind those messages. I want to know who dares to mention my license like it's merchandise. And I want to know who dared to put Marcus Kleinfeld's name into their game. Desmond nodded. Understood. I stared out the car window. Washington, D.C. In the morning still looked peaceful. Clean streets. Beautiful buildings. People heading to work as if nothing existed. But I knew that beneath that surface there were lines crawling forward, and I had just spotted a tail. Harlan in handcuffs was only the opening scene. What truly sent cold down my spine was the possibility that Sloan wasn't panicking at all. She had prepared in advance. She had calculated even the sacrifice of her own father to shove every crime onto Miles and drag my license down with him. I inhaled. Then I said it, like reminding myself, like reading a vow. Fine, Sloan. If you want to play Plan B, I'll show you Plan Z. Miles looked at me. Mom, what do we do next? I turned to him, and my eyes were no longer those of a mother soothing her son. They were the eyes of a woman who had survived the 90s, the rain on the interstate, the debt, and the contempt. We're not going to chase them anymore, I said. We're going to drag them into the light. I paused for a beat, letting the sentence settle into the air. And this time, you won't stay silent. You'll stand beside me. You'll look straight at them and let them speak the truth themselves. 2 weeks passed. The name Pembroke was now whispered around Washington, D.C., the way people whisper about a dreadful disease. No one wants to say it aloud, but everyone knows it exists. Harlan Pembroke was sitting in a detention facility awaiting trial on 5 different charges. His lawyers changed faster than the weather outside the window, simply because no one could afford to pay them anymore. Sloan moved into a studio apartment in Southeast D.C., 400 square feet, thin walls, a shared laundry room on the ground floor. For the first time in her life, she had to wash her own clothes and count every coin at the checkout counter. I let her stay there, to let her get used to reality. It was a necessary lesson. Miles returned to the CEO's chair. But he was no longer the Miles he used to be. The softness that once made predators think they could crush him was gone. In his eyes now was something that hadn't been there before. Steel. Not cold, not cruel, but steady. Yesterday, he fired the head of procurement for taking bribes. No hesitation, no long explanations, no apologies. He had learned his lesson. I remember clearly the first morning Miles returned to Capital Freight, this time not as chief commercial officer, but as the one in charge. I drove him there, even though he could easily have driven himself. "You don't need to take me, Mom," Miles said as we stopped in front of the glass building on K Street. "I know," I replied, "but I want to see you walk through that door." Just once. We sat quietly in the car for a few minutes. Through the windshield, I watched employees arrive one by one. Some glanced over curiously, some lowered their heads in respect. The news had spread across the city. No one didn't know what had happened. "Mom," Miles spoke softly, "do I deserve this position? I let things go too far. I let them—" "Stop," I cut in, turning to look straight into his eyes. "You didn't let them do anything. They chose what they did. They chose to lie. They chose to defraud. They chose to destroy. Those were their choices, not yours." I placed my hand against his cheek. "Do you know what I learned over decades in business? Dignity isn't in your blood. It doesn't come from family names or mortgaged mansions. Dignity is something you protect every day, by how you treat others, by how you stand up after you fall, and by choosing what is right instead of what is easy." Tears welled at the corners of Miles's eyes. "But I fell, Mom. I let people think I was a failure." "And now you stand up," I said. "That's what they'll remember. Not the fall, but how you rose." Miles took a deep sea breath, wiped his tears, and opened the car door. As he stepped out, I saw him taller, not in body, but in spirit. Security opened the door for him. No more refusal of keys, no more suspicious looks. My son had come home, and this time he returned as himself. As for me, that afternoon I sat on the same stone bench in Dumbarton Oaks Park, where it had all begun. Autumn gold surrounded me. The air was clear, no suitcases, no desperation. Noah, my grandson, cheeks flushed, ran along the path laughing as he chased a plump pigeon. His laughter rang through the quiet space like church bells. I set my phone down. No emergency calls, no anxious messages. My empire was running smoothly and the home front was secure. A ray of sunlight brushed my cheek. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to go anywhere. I realized then I hadn't just saved my son. I had given him the most important inheritance of all, the understanding that dignity is not passed down through genes and cannot be bought with titles. It must be defended every day. I took a small thermos from my bag. Plain steel, no silver, no gold plating. I poured hot tea. Steam dissolved into the cool autumn air. A woman pushing a baby stroller passed by. Our eyes met. I smiled, no mask, no power. She smiled back. I had nothing left to hide, and no one left to fear me. I was free. But what is freedom? Over the past 2 weeks, I had asked myself that question more than once. Had I gone too far? Harlan and Sloan deserved punishment. That was beyond dispute. But stripping them of everything, exposing them before all of Washington, D.C., was that justice or revenge? I remembered Harlan's face as he collapsed. I remembered Sloan screaming in despair. Did I pity them? No, not because I was heartless, but because I understood this. Pity is reserved for those who feel remorse. They felt only regret at being caught. If I hadn't stopped them, they would have done this to someone else, to another family, to another child. I didn't destroy a family. I ended a cycle of abuse, and I understood the boundary between justice and revenge. Justice is stopping them from harming anyone else, forcing them to face consequences. Revenge is continuing to crush them when they are no longer a threat. 3 days ago, I did something that surprised Miles. I called Sloan's lawyer and made an offer. If she entered an abuse behavior counseling program, completed 200 hours of community service, and accepted supervised visitation with Noah, I would not obstruct reasonable visitation rights, not for Sloan, but for Noah. And because I wanted to remind myself, I am not like them. I use power to protect, not to crush. Grandma! Noah ran up, holding out a perfect red leaf. Isn't it pretty? I lifted him into my arms. "It's beautiful, my love." "Grandma, why doesn't my dad live with my mom anymore?" The question came, just as I knew it would. "Because sometimes," I said slowly, "adults make the wrong choices, and when they do, they have to take responsibility. Like when I get time out?" "Exactly." Miles walked over, picked up Noah, and kissed his forehead. "I fell," he said, "but Grandma taught me this. Dignity isn't what people say about you. It's how you live when no one is watching." He turned to me. "Real family isn't blood or names. It's who stands beside you when everything collapses." I placed my hand over his. Nothing more needed to be said. As the sun set, we left the park. The stone bench behind us was now just part of the past. Ahead lay the future, uncertain, but ours. And this time, we would write it with dignity, with strength, and with love that needs no permission to exist. That is the legacy I leave my son. And that is the lesson I want to share with you. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. In your opinion, where is the line between justice and revenge? Thank you for staying until the very last moment.